English language proficiency is essential for successful flight training. It is especially important for international students who are training at an English-speaking flight school. In our experience, there is sometimes confusion about what this means for flight schools, students, and sponsors. This video explains the English language issue and provides clarity on an English language training and assessment pathway for international students. In an ideal world, all students would arrive at flight school with a level of English so they can understand their instructors and training courseware, learn how to fly an airplane, and learn how to communicate with air traffic control. But we don't live in an ideal world. Students commonly arrive with varying levels of language proficiency, and those with weak English have problems. They struggle with ground school, they struggle in the aircraft, and they struggle on the radio with air traffic control. Training efficiency deteriorates. Flight instructors get frustrated. It takes more time to progress. Students have to repeat exams and check rides. Sadly, some students eventually give up and go home. At worst, poor English is a safety concern. We all want to avoid this. So, what can flight schools and students do to deal with language proficiency? There is no quick fix to weak English. Language takes a long time to learn. Language training programs are typically counted in hundreds of hours, and students with lower levels of English may need weeks of full-time language training before they are ready for flight school. For this reason, the best time to deal with language is long before a student begins flight training, to allow sufficient time for students to prepare. The starting point is appropriate language assessment. First, we need to identify those students who have enough English to cope, so we can admit them with confidence and avoid unnecessary language training. Second, we need to identify those with weaker English, so we can minimize risk on one hand and offer language training on the other. For this purpose, tests of general and academic English are of limited use, because the skills they measure and the content they present have nothing to do with learning how to fly an airplane. Tests of ICAO English are also unfit for purpose. As they address ATC communications, not only do they assume professional knowledge that students do not have, but they do not address the skills required to read, listen, and speak in a flight training environment. ICAO Level 4 is the bare minimum, and there is no guarantee that a student with Level 4 will cope. Instead, flight schools need customized language assessment designed for aspiring pilots, which enables robust selection, admission, and training decisions. On a practical level, such an assessment should be available remotely to students before they arrive, enabling efficient planning and preparation. Once we have screened students, we then need an engaging language training program for those that need it. An effective program will target the professional aviation training domain. An aviation context not only motivates students, but it means they will be more likely to cope with the real thing later on. That said, a good course will be accessible for students with 0 flight hours and little knowledge of aviation, and will not aim to teach standard radio calls, flight instruments, or the difference between height, altitude, and flight level. That's the job of the flight instructors. Instead, the course will select meaningful topics and content, and present language activities that will motivate aspiring pilots, equipping them with the listening, reading, and speaking skills they need to learn to fly. Like language assessment, language training is best at the front end. A student who completes a language course before flight training will be better able to cope from day one, and will be able to focus all their attention on flight training itself. Running language training on top of a flight training schedule leads to problems. Avoid the language burden for your flight instructors, and avoid using your aircraft as language classrooms, and get language training done before flight training starts. Even better, do it before students leave home to avoid the costs of accommodating students once they arrive at flight school. E-learning is attractive and can be a cost-effective way of providing training hours remotely. But even with instructor support and the very best of today's technology, language cannot be acquired via e-learning alone. If students are to develop the speaking skills they need to interact in the classroom, briefing room, and cockpit, they will need time practicing spoken English under the guidance of a language professional. Finally, a word on ATC communications. Understanding and making radio calls is obviously fundamental for pilots, and thorough instruction in standard phraseology is essential for all students as they work towards solo flight. But training in standard phraseology is not a shortcut to English language proficiency, and phraseology alone is insufficient for safe and effective radio communications. Students need broader language skills if they are to communicate efficiently with their instructor, maintain situational awareness, and cope with the unexpected. These skills need to be in place before students start flight training and long before they make their first radio call. Regardless of where they train, at some point all students will need to demonstrate proficiency to the baseline ICAO Level 4, with some airlines setting even higher standards for recruitment. Once they take their seat on the flight deck, communication skills become fundamental to safe and efficient operations, both with air traffic control and with crew members who may not share the same culture and first language. Reaching out to students with a robust aviation English solution not only helps ensure that flight training is the positive, rewarding, and life-changing experience it should be, but it prepares students for their career as an airline pilot.